Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today, I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Diane Button. She's an end of life doula and a doula educator, and also the author of the book Dear Death. And we'll be talking all about her book and the companion workbook that's available. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. So make sure you subscribe to this channel. Also, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. And if you're so inclined, go to eoluniversity.com/support and make a small financial contribution if you're able to help keep this show and the channel on the air. So thank you in advance if you decide to do that. And now we'll move on with my interview with Diane Button. Today, I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Diane Button. Diane is a founding partner of the Bay Area End of Life Doula Alliance in Northern California and an instructor for the University of Vermont Larner College of Medicine End of Life Doula Professional Certificate Program. That's a mouthful to say. She holds a master's in counseling psychology, is INELDA certified, and served as a board member of the National End of Life Doula Alliance. Diane is the author of several books and trainings, including The Letterbox, a memoir and legacy project which has been published in 5 languages. Her work has been featured in Connecting Point, The Hour of Power, and numerous TV and radio programs, inspiring others with a meaningful way to leave a legacy for loved ones. Her latest book, Dear Death, combines the insights gained from her research on the 4 pillars of a meaningful life with over a decade working with hospice and doula clients in their final days. And you can learn more about Diane and her books and her work at her website, dianebutton.com. So Diane, welcome and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Karen. It's nice to see you.
I've been looking forward to talking to you. I really enjoyed reading your book. And so we'll go into that in just a moment. But I was hoping you'd start by just telling us all a little bit more about your own story, what drew you to become a death doula and to be doing the work you're doing now.
Oh, well, like a lot of death doulas, my story started with a personal loss, and that was the time I companioned my grandfather through his end of life experience. And my grandfather was my hero. He was a plastic surgeon in the San Francisco Bay Area, but he spent all of his time working on burn victims only, like really severe burn victims. And I knew that he'd witnessed so much suffering and so much loss in his life. And I know that he always grieved for the lives that he couldn't save. But there was something about him that was very humble and simple. And he was just a peaceful, quiet man. And when he died, I was holding him in my arms and he was smiling. Like he died with this giant smile on his face, the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. And at that moment, the church bells rang and the breeze blew. And it was just this
Wow.
amazing moment. And it hit me like right then and there that, wow, he lived in peace and he died in peace. And, I immediately wished that I had asked him more questions and, kind of understood more why he was so peaceful, because I felt like his life brought him peace and death. And I just desperately wanted to know his secret, and I didn't ask him. So I started exploring on my own, and I started taking courses and workshops and, reading everything I could about death and dying. And I went back and got my master's in counseling, and I started volunteering at our local hospice. And then about maybe 5 years ago, when I heard about end of life doulas, it really caught my attention because I realized right away that doulas could be full companions for the dying in so many different ways, like a birth doula is for a new mom. I realized that we could have the time to spend with our clients and that we could dig deep, have the hard conversations about, fears and guilt, regret, or whatever somebody might be holding. And it really inspired me to take a couple of death doula trainings, which I did. And then I started in on the NEDA board, and I really just started diving into the field more and more. And I'm so grateful that I did, because it's just such heart work. I just am so grateful to be able to do this work.
Yes, absolutely, and that's such a touching story about your grandfather, so beautiful, thanks for sharing that, and I can just imagine the suffering that he witnessed and dealt with in his whole career, and what a what a testament in a way that you can live a life and do really hard things in your life and still be at peace and still find meaning and joy and love, and that's very beautiful and sweet.
It is. Thank you.
So I'm curious about what inspired you to write the book Dear Death, which is, as I said before, it's a wonderful book. And I'd like to have you tell us a little bit more about the story and even the research that you did for it.
Oh, sure. Well, I wanted to lean deeper into the conversations about death and dying, but I wanted to do it through the lens of living. The dying have been my greatest teachers, and I really consider it such an honor and a privilege to sit at the bedside of the dying. I learn something that from every single person. I'm inspired in some way. But I started noticing that there was themes in that people kind of brought with them at the end of life. And as I was going back to get my master's in counseling, I started, it was time to do my thesis. And I started interviewing people who were 72 and older about what made their lives meaningful. And that's how I came up with the 4 pillars of a meaningful life. It actually was sort of 7 components that I had distilled in a phenomenological study, which means you interview these people and then you find the common threads, like what matters to all these people, like where are the similarities. And the reason that I really was inspired to write the book was because I knew about these pillars, but I was also really interested in death and dying with peace because of my grandfather. And I kind of wanted to weave these two together through the lens of dying. How can you live well? And what is that all about? And I noticed, talking to my friends and family about, the death and dying, which is a subject that's passionate to me, most of them weren't very interested. But when I started to talk about life and living, with meaning and curiosity and intention and awareness, in order to prepare for death, that got their attention. And it just became a really good starting place for me to dig deeper. So, I've come to learn that one day we're all going to die, and every day we're all getting closer to our death. But until that day comes, we're living. And so, what's that all about? And so, the reason I wrote the book was an answer to a question, which is really kind of the subtitle of the book, which is, how do you live in such a way that brings you meaning and fulfillment and as much peace as possible at the end of life, and also allows you to live each day with more joy. So I kind of intertwined all my learnings over the lifetime into Dear Death.
Well, I really resonate with it because that's of my own heart as well. This idea, in my through my work in hospice, I felt like I learned so much about how to live. I didn't I mean, of course, I learned about dying as well, but as you said, I learned what I needed to change in my own life in order to live my life more authentically and a life of deeper meaning and living according to my own values in a way also. And I think the work with the dying just really gave me the courage to do that and to pursue it. And similar to you, I just want to tell everyone about that. I just want
I
everyone
know,
to know, like, if you knew this, it could change everything for you.
I
But
know.
it's a hard subject sometimes to get across to other people.
I know. It's hard for people to understand that they really are such wonderful teachers, and there's so much we can learn from the dying. It's like people who always say, "Isn't your work depressing?" And then, we get to say, "No, it's beautiful, it's powerful." And, we're serving and giving and companioning, but we're also getting so much in return. And really, it's beautiful work. I'm so grateful that we get to do this work.
Oh, I know. It's such a privilege.
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk us through the 4 pillars of a meaningful life and just go through each one because the book really focuses around them, but it's really a nice, very nice summary, I guess, of all the things that you learned. And so I'd love to just talk about each one of those 4 pillars.
Sure. So basically, it started out to be 7, and I've kind of condensed it into 4. So I'll go over it a little bit more thoroughly that way. But so, like I said, I interviewed these people who were 75 and older, all had felt like their lives had been meaningful. And they love life. They were happy and joyful in certain ways. They've also struggled and had hardships just like everyone else. But they felt like they could have died the next day and they would have been content with the life that they had lived. And that was really kind of my criteria was, how do you get to this place at the end of your life where you can feel content and peaceful and calm and good about the life that you've lived? Because that's the life I want to live. I want to do that. I want to get there with that feeling. So the 4 pillars that condensed down were, the first one was faith and spirituality. So I found that most people were peaceful and felt a very good sense of calm in their life if they had some kind of faith-based or spiritual practice. It doesn't have to, or they were an atheist or an agnostic person, but they were comfortable with it. It's not about what you believe. It's not about a certain faith or a certain spiritual path or any of that. It's just about knowing what you believe and letting it settle inside you so that you are comfortable with that at the end of your life. Because wrestling with spiritual issues is not easy at the end of life anyway, but it's, I think, probably the most important path to peace at the end of life, especially at the moment as you're transitioning. And a lot of people who haven't had some sort of reconciliation with their faith and spirituality have it come up at the end of life, and it can be challenging. So work on that now and just know where you stand, whoever you are, whatever you believe, it's okay, but just know it. And then the other one is about living well. And living well is where I condensed kind of acceptance, gratitude, a positive attitude when possible, forgiveness if and when you're ready. And finally, living well is about intention. It's about knowing the power of your personal choice and saying yes, yes to the things you want to say yes to, but also being, willing to say no when something isn't for you, because we have so many choices. I heard one time that we make over 10,000 choices every day. And of course, most of those are not conscious choices, that we're not aware of them, but we're making them all the time. So when we can be aware of our choices, let's pause and make them thoughtfully, because when we do that, that also helps us accept. It helps us show gratitude. It helps us be kind. It helps us shift our attitude. So that awareness is really important in living well. And then the next one, number 3, is love and relationships, which most people would guess would be on the list. Life at the end is about who you love and the relationships you've built over your lifetime. I always ask my clients like who they're going to want gathered around their bedside when they die. And that is important to know, but it's also something we build over the course of our lifetime. So, pay attention to how we love and who we love and how we nurture and foster those relationships that matter most. And then finally, the last one, and I also think it's a really important one for end of life reviews, legacy work, is charity and contribution. It's really about a question, is the world a better place because I was here? Did I make a difference? Did my life matter? And so it's not about, building wings of libraries and doing big, giant acts of charity. It's about the everyday kindness. Was I kind? Did I smile? Did I take care of my neighbor? I think that that's where we trip up sometimes. We think that our contribution has to be something gigantic, but it doesn't. I had a bout with breast cancer myself, and just the people bringing food, telling me that they were saying prayers or sending me, good vibrations every day or whatever was coming my way. I felt it. I felt so much love from so many people from so many different places. And that was, to me, their contribution to my healing. And it really meant a lot to me. So I think the contribution we make in the world is important, but it doesn't have to be so gigantic that, it's in the newspapers or, you know what I mean? It's just how we show up. And so I think that that's been one of the ones that I hear about the most with clients is I just want to know that I'm leaving an imprint on the world and that my life mattered.
Hmm. That's really beautiful. I love those 4 pillars because they're really the big things, the big milestones that matter to us, and within each one of them, there's so much flexibility and so much room for individuality so that it's not like there's some prescribed path of this is what it takes to live a meaningful life. No, a meaningful life could look like almost anything, but has something within each one of these pillars. And I really like that as a framework for looking at how each one of us lives our lives.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really worked, and it really helps me with clients too, just to know those pillars because I always keep them in my mind as we're having conversations, and I look for maybe one of them not being really in balance or not really that's causing some discomfort, or emotional distress or something. So I use that as a foundation for clients from time to time.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I was thinking this is something I hadn't planned before to talk about, but I know you wrote your book in 2019, but then COVID happened,
Yeah.
and as you were getting ready to publish the book, um, we went through this time of pandemic and of so many people dying by themselves in hospitals and families not being
Mm,
able to be together, and this like heartbreaking time really. But I love that you addressed it in your book. I mean I know you had to add that, I'm sure, to the original manuscript, and I was so happy that you did because I feel like this is an incredible time in our history and for our society that we do need to mark, and we want to make note of it that this has happened.
yeah.
And even the fact that those people who died of COVID during those years still had meaningful lives. And if you look at the 4 pillars, um, it feels tragic that their family wasn't with them, but at the same time, they were loved and they loved others. And, we can find our way through our distress over that time in a way by just looking back to these pillars and recognizing that all the things that we need to make life and death meaningful were still there, even though they were unique circumstances.
Yeah, it's so true. And also, kind of part of the adding to COVID or during COVID and afterwards is the takeaway of that we don't know. There's so much uncertainty in the world right now. And so, what I've noticed since the book came out is that so many more young people are buying it and reading it and attending workshops and interested in talking about their mortality. So, while there was the tragic side, of course, and the people dying alone, the this what's happening right now, I feel, is that more and more people are realizing that tomorrow isn't certain. And so I've just noticed a lot more young people reaching out to talk about these topics.
Yeah, that really makes sense, and having these 4 pillars as our foundation allows us to cope with the uncertainty that comes from day to day in our lives, and so we don't have to have the answers, we don't have to have a crystal ball and be able to see what's coming or how things will turn out. We just have to keep returning to those pillars and strengthening our foundation, and that's what will give us the tools we need to get through whatever happens and whatever is coming.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So your book is just wonderful. And this is a great time right now to be reading your book because of that fact. It is kind of does remind us all these are the things that matter the most. So focus on these things, even if you can't even imagine what might come in the next day or month or a year. Just keep focusing on these pillars.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, I know you have a chapter also on creating legacy projects, and that's something that I'm really interested in. And I really enjoyed reading that in the book. And I think it's something so valuable that we can offer to people who are dying that we're working with. So, would you talk to us a little bit more about legacy projects?
Sure. Well, I love doing legacy projects too. I find that it's a very creative part of doula work and caregiving to be able to have somebody lean into their legacy in a way that's meaningful to them. Now, legacy work isn't for everybody. Some people really want to focus on doing some healing with broken relationships, or maybe they want to do some spiritual healing first. And so you have to figure out if it's for every client. But once you get a client that's excited about legacy, I tend to get very excited about it too, because there's just so much there. There's so many opportunities. And so, to me, legacy projects are a win-win, because it's good for the client to be contemplating their life and their legacy, and what their life has been all about, and what matters to them in terms of their passions and things like that, because they're often wrapped up in the legacy project. But it's also a benefit for family members who are left behind, or loved ones who might learn something or have a memento of their loved ones after they die. But the main reason I think legacy projects are important is because people don't want to be forgotten. And so, how do you help people to have their legacies, their stories, the fact that they were here living on the planet, matter and become a memory for others after? So to me, it's partially about the life they've lived. Everybody's going to leave a legacy, whether they choose to or not. So there's the internal legacy, but the projects are usually tangible that I do with my clients. They're usually something that represents the person. So as I'm talking to my client, I'm always listening for things that might apply to their legacy for a project. Are they a gardener? Are they a cook? Did they like to travel? Did they write things down in a journal their whole life? Are they artistic? Are they into math? Do they have a book collection? I'm paying attention to things that might come out down the road as a possible legacy project, as a hobby or a passion, or something that they used to bring joy to their lives. So usually these unique type of legacy projects percolate over time as clients, begin to share their story. But if not, there's several kind of tried and true legacy projects I like to suggest, and I'm happy to share a few with you if you want to know what I do with my clients.
Yeah, please do. And I love this. This is one of the greatest things that death doulas offer to their patients, that at least when I was in hospice, no one ever really had time to sit down with the patient and do this type of a legacy project. And it's just so important because, as you said, one of our greatest fears is that no one will remember us when we're gone. And so it's so valuable. So yes, please share some ideas with us.
Okay, I'll share a couple. I know there's some in the workbook and in the book. There's so many different ones, and you can even find one and then modify it to meet the needs of your client or your person that you're working with, or for yourself, even if you're going to do one. But a couple of my favorite ones are, I like to go around the house and use what's already there, because to me, a lot of times clients aren't going out anymore. By the time we get to them, a lot of times they don't have the energy, or they're not leaving their home. And I think it's really appropriate in legacy work to use what already exists, because that's part of their legacy. It's already there. So one of the things I like to do is to go around the house with a client and gather gifts, items that are meaningful to them, that they might think are meaningful to someone else. So we'll go gather, what recently the client I did it with, we gathered ballet slippers, we gathered a scarf and hat, we gathered a calligraphy bit that she had drawn, that she loved calligraphy. Another one was a few postcards from a trip of a certain place that she shared with someone else. And so we end up with a collection of items that she wants to give to each person who she loves. And then I bring the next time, and sometimes this takes 2 or 3 visits to collect all these items. And then one time I'll come with wrapping paper and ribbon, and we'll talk. This is part of life review. This is how legacy becomes life review, because as we're wrapping the gifts, we're talking about the relationship with that person. We're talking about how that person's going to remember them, we're writing a card after we wrap it to that person, and the client might write it if they can still write, or they'll dictate it to me and I'll write it. And we save these gifts, and some clients might like to save them for a holiday celebration, but a lot of times clients will say, after I die, I want you to pass these gifts out to my loved ones, and the same sometimes I'll do with a letter that they want to read at the memorial, or they want me to read to the family after they die. And another one that I did that I really enjoyed was, this person had a book collection, but they had moved into a smaller living facility. So it wasn't packed with thousands of books. It was just maybe 80 books or so, but their favorite books of their entire life. So we went through the books and we picked out a book for each person for them to leave. And then they went in the book and they wrote a note to the person they wanted to leave that book to. And then I had them all, listed. So after the person died, I was able to tell the family as they go through the book collection, that there was one in there for each person. And that was really beautiful and special. And that person's bookshelf happened to have been sitting right next to the chair that they sat in for years. So every time they had visitors, the bookshelf was right behind them, and it was a meaningful part of that person's life. So it was a great legacy project. And you can do that with recipes, putting together
Mm.
recipe books. You can do that with gardens, and giving plants or giving cuttings from succulents. And so you get to know the people that you're working with, and you find legacy projects. But there's also ones that you can look for, because most people have books, and most people have recipes or some kind of something that they like cooking on a regular basis that you can put together for the family. And if not, you can always ask if your client wants to write a letter or leave birthday cards for the following year for people in their lives. And that's a very meaningful legacy project as well.
Mm. That's really beautiful, and I just admire the creativity you have in the moment, because
Um,
obviously it's something that happens differently for every person. You just go in the house and you kind of figure it out with them, how you can help them leave a legacy, and that's really wonderful.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. It's actually, it covers so many bases about digging into the hard conversations and the heart work, it's just joyful work to me.
I've seen it many times, many people who want to leave something as a legacy but have no idea where to begin, and they really do need some help, just some suggestions and ideas and another person to help them make that happen. And
Mhm.
so that's really wonderful. I love all those ideas, especially the books, because I love books so much. That how cherished would that be to receive a book from someone with a special note written inside as a keepsake?
Yeah. I do that more and more because it was so meaningful. And every time I've done something like that, where there's somebody had written there's a handwritten note, if they can, that's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's lovely. And these days, so many of us have books sitting on shelves that we aren't sure what to do with anyway. And I
Mhm.
mean, that's even a legacy project people could start working on at any time, thinking about, wow, someday who would I like to give this book to, and could start going through their library and thinking about that.
Yeah, it's true.
One of the other things that you write about in the book is about a good death, helping people have a good death, and we use that phrase a lot. I see it a lot of places. Good death, good life. But so I just like hearing from people, like, what how would you describe that, and what do you feel a good death is?
Mhm. That's a really hard question for me because, honestly, I grapple with that term, because physically we can't guarantee a good death. No one can guarantee anybody is going to have a good death. Sometimes death is messy, and sometimes there's pain and suffering, or some people die, like you were just talking about during COVID, who didn't get to say I love you, or who didn't get to say I'm sorry. And so that that's something that we can't guarantee, that everybody's going to have a good death. So I do have a little bit of an issue with that term, but I do think about like, what can we do to to work towards it as best as we possibly can. So what I've observed, a good death starts with a good life. And I write about it, this piece that I wrote called How to Die. And I don't remember it all off the top of my head, but it says something like, to die in peace, live in peace. To die with a full heart, live with a full heart. To die in harmony with all beings, live in harmony with all beings. And that applies to our spirituality and our kindness and truth and integrity. The only way I know from all of what I've learned is that what I do every day and the choices I make and the person I am and how I show up in the world is all I can do to create as much love and peace and kindness as I personally possibly can. Because I think if I were to die tomorrow or later today, it would, if I had a second to think about it, I would want to feel good about how I lived until that point. And so while we can't address everything that has to do with a good life, we can pay attention to how we're living into our lives each and every day to build towards at least having that peace at the end of life, knowing that you've said those words, that you've said, I love you, that you've said, I'm sorry, that you've asked for forgiveness when you've needed to, that you've done your share to make your corner of the world the best that you possibly can. I find that emotional piece is really important.
Hmm. I agree with you on that, and also the idea that just the term good death can lead some people astray if they don't understand that um, it isn't that there is one definition of a good death that everyone should aspire towards, and that, as you said, a good life, focusing on those pillars of meaning in your life, can help you be at a place where your death is as good as it can be. But since death is so uncertain and unpredictable and outside our control in so many ways, we just have to focus on the living end of it and how we live our lives, in order to make the best of whatever happens to us.
Yeah, it's true. It's just like we don't know exactly when we're going to die. We also don't know exactly how we're going to die. So that's what we really have is today.
Yeah. And as much as people wish they had control over it, they wish they could sign up for the good death. How do I order that to make sure that happens in my life? But um it isn't that certain or that manageable. We just have to do the best we can and be the best people we can be. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I really liked that. I guess it's a poem that you put in the book about to live with peace, or to die in peace. You have to live your life in peace, and that's
Yeah,
really nice.
thank you.
Well, oh yeah, it's also in the book. You have the doula's final checklist, which I wanted to mention this for any doulas listening because it seems so very helpful and a good way to make sure you're not leaving anything out, that you think of things that you should ask about or things to help with. So, um, tell us about the doula's final checklist. And is there well, I guess people should just get the book because it's in the book.
Well, I'll go over it today, but
But
it's
you'll
not
go
too
over it.
long. I don't mind going over it, and I'm
Okay.
happy to share. That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Um, so Well, what happened to me was when I first started out as a doula, I would enter someone's home with a giant long laundry list of questions, part of it probably because of my own fears and insecurities of not knowing exactly what to say, but then also kind of wanting to cover everything. And so what I came to learn really quickly is that once a client has a terminal diagnosis, and especially when they start declining, they don't have a lot of energy and they don't have a lot of time, oftentimes in the day, that is really good quality, upbeat time. I mean, that starts to diminish often as time goes by. So I found that I was taking away, or at least I felt like I was taking away from my clients' time to be with their loved ones when I would come in with so many questions that would maybe help me think about whether they maybe would like a legacy project, or there was something burdening them that was an issue of guilt or forgiveness. How do I get those questions asked and those answers so that I can know why I'm there that day? Because a lot of times you don't know. If you knock on somebody's door as a doula with an agenda, you're probably going to find out that that's not what it was all about. You might think you're there for a certain reason, but then you find, oh, there's somebody, a family member who needs something that day, or the client's in a different place than you thought. So I always like to show up without an agenda, yet at the same time, I like to always check in. And that's how I came up with this doula's checklist. And it's kind of a way of just asking these 6 questions that teach me so much about what's going on. And the question is I'll ask, what's worrying you when you're lying awake in bed at night? What's on your mind? And then I'll ask, what brings you joy when you're awake in the day? I'll ask them, what's left unsaid, what's left undone, and I'll ask them who matters most and what matters most. And those questions might come with a little bit more words attached to them, but I was just kind of giving it to you so you guys could have that checklist. But what happens is, if I ask that question and then I ask it again in a week, I'm going to have a different answer every time. But here's what I'm going to know. I'm going to know what's the client worrying about? Is there some guilt, shame, unfinished business, regret? Is there a phone call that needs to be made? Is there a letter that needs to be written? Are they worried about some medical issue or some other family member, or that what's going to happen after they die, or their memorial? There's so many things that people could be worrying about. So just ask them instead of trying to ask the broad questions that might get to that. Just ask them, and then you'll find that out. And then by asking what brings you joy, you find that those moments that they do still have good energy in the day, that they might choose something that brings them joy. Or who matters most, those are the people that you might want to make sure are part of the client's life during each day when the client is feeling the best, and what matters most, like, are your spiritual affairs in order? Are you done with what you need to do in terms of covering what matters most in your life? And then the simple questions of what's left unsaid also addresses some of that unfinished business that might be percolating. Sometimes things that have been held for 40 years start coming up at the bedside of the dying. So I always like to make space for the client to answer that question, because it's a big one, and it can start, if there's a secret that they've been keeping for a long time, it might just start percolating towards the end. And to be a doula at the bedside is oftentimes a very safe space for somebody to share what they might have been holding for a long time. So I take this checklist and I use it, and so do a lot of doulas, and a lot of them have been writing me and thanking me for that final checklist, because it really has been efficient in terms of how we enter in and meet with our clients in ways that give us a lot of information without taking too much time.
It's such a good reminder. And I like the fact that you ask the same questions each time you visit with the client or every week, because sometimes you're planting a seed about this idea that maybe there is unfinished business. And at the first time you ask it, they may think, no, I don't have anything. There's nothing there. But those issues will start to come to the surface and reveal themselves over time. And when you keep asking it, you're able to get more and more information each time. It seems to me that this checklist would be helpful for all hospice workers as well, because I know in hospice, people often fall into the trap of, but I have this whole list of things that I have to take care of and I have to ask about, and I have to do the review of systems and review the medications and go through all these things every time. And then there's never enough time to cover these other subjects, which are the things that really matter a great deal and will make a big difference to the patient in the end.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm often here when I'm teaching at the University of Vermont, there's a lot of hospice nurses and social workers who take the course. And, obviously one of the frustrations in hospice is not having the time to really dig deeply with each person because their workload is so intense. And we're finding over time that the hospices that are welcoming us in as part of the care team are really grateful because we can take the time that they can't take. So it's really working out to be a beautiful relationship. But I agree that the nurses do express some frustration about not being able to dig deep with their clients, and just to be able to even ask somebody what they're worrying about is a really beautiful question to ask, because that could be a medical answer, but it could be a spiritually or an emotional answer as well. But to be able to address that and try to alleviate in any way we can just by listening and being that peaceful presence is really a beautiful gift.
Mm. Well, it's really a wonderful tool having that checklist. And I think we all need these kind of simple tools, checklists, things written down as reminders for us, because in the hectic day to day of doing the work we do, it's easy to overlook certain things, or it's easy to forget, oh yes, I meant to ask that, but I didn't think of it at the time. And so I really like that you've compiled them into just a little list, and that's something that everyone should have, and including family members. It would be great if family members were asking their loved ones some of these questions as well, in order to have the deeper discussions they need to have.
That you're mentioning that, some people have told me that they've started doing it once a month with their partners or on their own. So a little group of people I know started calling it an emotional detox. So once a month they ask themselves those questions. What am I worrying about? What's bringing me joy? What's left unsaid? Because how beautiful if we all lived our lives where we were really practicing this on a regular basis, because it is kind of like a clean slate every month if you're able to make those calls and say you're sorry rather than holding it for decades until your deathbed.
Well, that the doula's final checklist is one of many really helpful practical tools that you offer in the book, Dear Death. But you also have a workbook that you created kind of as a companion to Dear Death. So tell us a little bit more about what's in the workbook, because it sounds like it's fairly new in terms of getting out into the world. So tell us what's there.
Okay, well, I did just pop the workbook up on Amazon not that long ago. And I wasn't sure if I was going to do that because I was thinking I was going to use it with some of the other doulas that I'm working with when we go in to speak at hospitals and when we go to retreats and such like that. It was kind of a tool that I thought that doulas could use for when they wanted to do community outreach and such. But I did upload it, and what it is um, the book, Dear Death, is divided into 6 sections. And the first 4 are the 4 pillars of a meaningful life. And the last 2 sections are about more end of life planning and thinking through what you want your vigil to be like, your memorial, your burial, advanced directives, and some of the not so fun things for a lot of people, except us who love talking about it all.
Yeah.
But the first part of the book is much more gentle, and then you kind of get into the action stuff that you can actually do. So the workbook is basically a direct reflection of the book. So a lot of people read the book, one chapter, then they do the workbook exercises, and there's 4 exercises for each chapter. So at the end of each chapter, you will be addressing who you are and how that chapter or that pillar or that need to prepare for end of life applies in your own life. And so that's how the workbook came to be. I really wanted it to, first I wanted it to be a doula toolkit kind of in a way. And there are vigil plans in there. There's a life review in there. There's a lot of legacy projects in there. There's a lot of things that you can ask your clients and work with your clients on when they're stuck in certain areas. But I've really come to realize that it's also for book clubs because they're using it now and such. It's kind of for all of us to lean into what matters most, but to pause. A lot of my work is about pausing and just being in the moment even the exercise that I give a lot of my clients of find something beautiful every day and look at it for a minute, and just take it in, because it's a big pause to reflect. Those are the kind of things that I like to include, but I try to make them fun as well so that they're not really heavy. I mean, of course, it's impossible to make an advanced directive really fun, but you can make it at least meaningful. And you can, when you think about, flowers and songs and things that are important to you at the end of life. So, I really wanted to make it fun, but thought provoking. And I wanted to people to walk away knowing themselves and what matters most to them when it was all said and done.
Hmm. So that's really wonderful, and I think that's really practical, but it's the perfect companion for the book because you'll learn a lot from reading the book, but it's really nice having activities to do that really help you kind of incorporate and embody some of those things that you're learning with specific activities. And I know you mentioned to me you have an activity called mint jelly, and you told me that that's one of your favorite things from the workbook. So I thought maybe you could share that with the audience too.
Sure. I would love to. I love to talk about mint jelly, but I have to tell the story because it
Okay.
comes with the story.
Yes. Yes.
So you heard me talk about my grandfather. He was my hero. And he was dying. I didn't know how close he was to dying, but we all went to his house for dinner, and he had a round table. So we were all gathered around this round table. And my mom had made his favorite meal of like pork chops and potatoes and mint jelly and favorite dessert, all of his favorite foods. And we were all just talking and reminiscing. And my grandfather, like I said before, he was very quiet, and he wasn't one to say I love you and express his feelings, but you knew it, you could feel it. But that night, my grandfather was talking more about his past and saying things that I hadn't heard him say before. So at one point, he leaned in and he said to us all, when I die, I'm really going to miss. And then he just paused. And I was expecting, I like really leaned forward. I'm like, this is it. This is my grandfather. He's going to tell me how much he's going to miss us and how amazing we were and how much, we've meant in his life and all that. I'm just waiting for the moment. And he leans and he says, I'm really going to miss mint jelly. And our whole family was like, you got to be kidding me. This perfect opportunity for him to like share his heart with us, and he's going to miss mint jelly, and we just couldn't believe it. So it kind of became a family story, obviously, because it's hilarious. And so I created an exercise around it, which is sort of life review, sort of legacy project, sort of even vigil planning, but it's really simple and it's really fun. And what I do when I'm teaching it, like at a retreat center or a community gathering, is I'll take a piece of paper and I'll draw a plate and some silverware on it so that people think they have a placemat in front of them that they can draw on. And we'll talk about, well, I forgot to mention Frank Sinatra was playing in the background with my grandfather that night. So I asked people, and I sometimes do this one-on-one with clients as well, to imagine it's their last meal with their loved ones. And I asked them to take some time to think about who's there, like who's at your table. And on the side of the paper, they write a list of all the people. And sometimes I do it as a meditation where you can just visualize them all, entering your house and coming in through your kitchen and sitting there. Who's there? So who are your people? And what songs are playing? And what's for dinner? Like, what's your favorite meal? And then I have them fill out, when I die, I'm really going to miss. And then they complete that. And that's it. And you can do it in a half an hour with your client. And it's beautiful because it brings people in. It creates a very present moment experience where people dig into their heart and they really think about those questions.
Hmm. Oh, that's such a sweet story. I love that. And I see why that's one of your favorite exercises because of the story that goes with it. And that's very touching.
Yeah.
Well, I want to remind our listeners that I'm talking with Diane Button about her book, Dear Death: Finding Meaning in Life, Peace in Death, and Joy in an Ordinary Day. And Diane, where can listeners get the book and workbook?
Both of them are on Amazon right now. And if you look at them, just be sure it says the covers are very similar, but the workbook does say workbook in really big letters. I didn't get very fancy and creative with it. Like I said, I wasn't really sure how I was going to roll with it, but they're both on Amazon.
Well, I believe this is a book and the workbook as well that people should just have on their shelves. It's a really helpful book to read. It's helpful to have as a resource and for activities, and so I highly recommend it. And I wanted to mention, well, anyway, I guess I just want to thank you so much for joining me here, Diane, and coming on to talk to me about also that. So the book begins with a letter to death. That's why it's called Dear Death, and
Mhm.
ends with a last letter to death, which I really loved. And so as we close, well, first, a chance for you to say anything else you want to say, but I'd love if, as we close, you would read the last letter to death.
Mm. Well, thank you so much too for having me here. I love you and this podcast and everything that you do for us and in the end of life world and the world at large because it's so important. So thank you. Thanks for including me.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to read the last letter to death from Dear Death. Dear Death, you have found me here while I am alive and awake, still running between raindrops, unafraid to get wet and welcoming the storms. I am ready. I am fully and authentically myself, someone I have come to love and care about deeply. Today, I welcome the mystery that awaits me across the threshold. I have found meaning in my life. I believe I will find meaning in death. May it be so.
Mm, goosebumps.
Thank you.
I love that. That's very beautiful. Perfect way to sum up the book, but also our conversation today. So thank you again, Diane.
You're welcome. Thank you too. Take care.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Diane Button as I did. It was really enjoyable to hear her story and also learn more about her book, Dear Death. So get the book and the workbook. I think you'll like having them available to you as a resource in the future. And so we'll say goodbye until we're together the next time.